Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Deadhead Cannabis Show. I'm Larry Mishkin of Mishkin Law in Chicago, joined as always by Rob Hunt of Lene Holdings out in lovely San Diego, California. And kids, this is a great day to be listening to our show. We've got one of the all-time favorite Grateful Dead shows, Dick's Picks #4, so clearly one of Dick LaVatla's favorite shows as well. And there's so much that we like about it. We have 7 musical clips. We've got great articles. Don't go anywhere. We're going to keep you busy for an hour. So, Dan, if you could dive right in, February 13th, 1970, the Filmore East in New York.
Well, now, Susie, baby, looks like we goofed again. Wake up, little Susie. Wake up, little Susie. We gotta go home. Wake up, little Susie, wake up. Wake up, little Susie, wake up. Both fell sound asleep. Wake up, little Susie, and weep. The movie's over, it's 4 o'clock, and we're in trouble deep. Wake up, little Susie, wake up, little Susie. What are you gonna tell your mama? What are you gonna tell your pop? What are you gonna tell our friends when they say, ooh, now, wake up, little Susie?
No, don't change your dial. That's not the Everly Brothers, even though it maybe sounds like them. This is your friends and ours, the Grateful Dead, on February 13th, 1970, at the Fillmore East. Covering the song the Everly Brothers made famous, written by Felice and Boudleaux Bryant back in lovely 1957. Rob, you got to love a show when the Dead jump out and start playing "Wake Up, Little Susie."
Yeah, you do, and I think I'm a big Everly Brothers fan, and I think that song. It's so funny to think that how racy it was when it came out. That was the song was like sort of which books got banned. That was a song that was banned from the radio for being too racy. So a little surprising that one attracted all the ire of the radio stations, but the Everlys didn't get that one played for a long time despite being a big hit.
This is true, and it's such a great song. The Dead actually wound up playing it about 13 times. They started playing it back in 1970, and then they oh, no, excuse me. This was the first time they ever played it at this show, and the last time they played it was in November of 1970 at the Cap Theater.
Yeah, in Portchester.
Yeah. So it did not get a lot of coverage by the Dead, but when they played it great. And that's what you got to know. This album's on Dick's Picks 4, and in the liner notes, Owsley writes about how this album came about, because he said Bear's Choice had just come out, which was a kind of like a mini live album that the Dead put out. And so he had to go on to write about that the songs which were on Bear's Choice, which came from this concert, are missing from this release due to the consideration that you, the buyer, may already have them. Also, the suits have their rules about copyrights and such. I would like to be able to present these shows the way they were, but I guess we must make do with what we have. So, in case anybody's worried at home, they cut out from this show Katie May, Wake Up Little Susie, Black Peter, and Smokestack Lightning. We're going to cover all of those today except Katie May, and I happen to love Katie May, but it just didn't fit into the program. But we're going to hit these other shows that Owsley was disappointed that they couldn't get on this Dick's Picks release when it came out.
That's awesome. And I keep thinking, Larry, that if Wake Up Little Susie's too racy, I wonder how they felt about Loose Lucy or or Sugaree, or some of the other ones that deal with sexuality that the Grateful Dead played.
Yeah, well, maybe those came around a little bit later, and not always quite so well. Loose Lucy, I get, is about as obvious as you can get. We like to ball all night. That's, I guess.
Yeah, she come running, we ball all night.
That's true. Well, although I don't remember Loose Lucy getting a lot of airplay when we were growing up, so maybe I just wasn't tuned into it. But
even Dupree's, I think, is significantly dirtier than than Wake Up Little Susie.
You're talking about Jelly Roll Blues?
Exactly. Jelly Roll driving Stone mad.
Yeah, well, that's true, I suppose. Although I never shot anybody over it, but we have so many tunes. I want to just really quickly dive right into the second clip we have before we break over into other stuff, because this show, coming when it did, February 13th, 1970. So it's right on the cusp of Working Man's. We're coming out of the Primal Dead. The boys are playing a lot of stuff. Wake Up Little Susie's a little more Americana. but they can't stay that way for too long. And the second clip we're going to dive into is Smokestack Lightning. I know we've played this before, a Howlin' Wolf tune recorded back in 1956, but go ahead and play it because the boys are really on this night and they cover this song very well.
Whoa, fare you will. I'll never see you no more. Why don't you hear me cry? Ooh, ooh, ooh.
Well, the boys never met a good blues tune that they didn't love, and they really go into this one. It's just great, and I love the Howlin' Wolf story about how the song was actually inspired from he and the boys back in the day watching the trains go by at night, and they would sit out in the country, see the trains go by, and as he says, watch the sparks come out of the smokestack. That was Smokestack Lightning. Great song, and what a pleasure to hear the Dead play it.
Yeah, and the story makes sense. The explanation makes sense. But yeah, it's again, I loved it when Pig covered the blues. I thought that he had such a great blues voice. He was just a natural for singing songs like "Smokestack Lightning" or what are some other ones that we've talked about in the past. There's a handful that were just Pig classics.
And it seems like Bobby wound up picking up most of those that carried through. Bobby would do the smokestack lightning in the days when we saw it. Would usually typically come out of a truck, and so you could either hope for a spoonful or a smokestack to really kind of get the blues jam going. Um, but what's really fun is listening to Jerry play the guitar on it, and he's just got that bluesman skill in him, and he really just picks that song apart in a great way.
No doubt.
So great concert, folks, and we're going to dive back into it in a few minutes, just because there's so much good stuff there. But there's just a ton of other news floating around right now that we don't want to miss, and so we're going to dive into some of these news stories that we have pulled for you today. And the first one, and I'm just going to throw this out there just as a little matter of personal pride, so I hope everybody can live with this with me. But the state of Missouri, man, talk about a state that's come out right out of the box, just kicking ass in the legal marijuana scene. What they're doing is, really putting Illinois to shame, considering it's a sister state. And MOCAN, which is the big group in Missouri that's running everything, didn't hesitate. And there was a big article in the Riverfront Times, which is the St. Louis alternative newspaper, that just came out yesterday, or February 7th, sorry. And starts off by saying marijuana went legal in Missouri on Friday, February 5th, and that day alone, they sold $5 million worth of cannabis. Over the Friday and Saturday, they sold over $12 million worth of cannabis. 8 million adult use, 4 million medical. That blows everybody out of the water, including Illinois, which I think came in somewhere right around $3 million on its first official day of sales. Now, of course, what they don't say is that on Illinois' first official day of sales, it had a limited number of dispensaries because only the multi-state operators who had the medicals were operating at that time. But Missouri's given out right out of the box 200 plus dispensary licenses and over 50 cultivation licenses and 30 infusion licenses. And on top of that, Missouri, they were the second fastest state to come online, 87 days from when the law was passed in November to when they've got their first adult use dispensary up and running. In Arizona, I think they said they did it in 80 days. In Illinois, if you take away the medical providers who got to start operating right away, it took about 3 years. So, there's really a lot to be learned. It's not too too often than I would like, I have to play the role of the embarrassed guy from Missouri, thanks to the wonderful political pronouncements that my state routinely throws out. But in this instance, I can say that I'm damn proud to be a Missourian because they got it right. And the headline in the Riverport News was Missouri got high as hell last weekend and spent $12.7 million on weed. I'm like, way to go, boys! That's my hometown, boys, and I'm loving it. That's the way to do it.
That is big news for Missouri. It's a lot of weed being smoked there. And again, I love it when new adult use markets open up because it takes away that much more market for illicit sales to migrate from other states. So that's $5 million in weed that was on that first day that wasn't bought from the illicit side. So it's not going to eradicate it, but it's certainly going to put a dent in it. And every time another state goes adult use, it makes it that much more difficult in the long term for the illicit market to compete. And I keep saying, until all 50 states have adult use, kind of widespread adult use markets, we're never getting rid of the illicit market. So we still have a long way to go, but that's a nice start. It definitely sounds like Missouri's going to be north of $1 billion market for the year.
That would be nice. And talking about another state that seems to be doing things the right way, as far as I'm concerned, Nevada, which is just passing a bill, is considering a bill that would remove marijuana from the controlled substances list and strip the pharmacy board's control over it. Apparently in Nevada, the Nevada Pharmacy Board exercises control over the marijuana program, and the guy who sponsored the bill said we don't need several levels of regulations on a substance now that we know is part and parcel of our community and part and parcel of our economy. This is a burdensome regulation. We need to remove the Nevada Board of Pharmacy statutorily now from having oversight over cannabis products and cannabis derivatives. That's just great.
So that's huge news. And I love the story, and I dug into it. I'd already read it before you'd sent it over to me. And I'll tell you why I think it's exciting. I think it's exciting on multiple fronts. One is that I've always been a firm believer that removing cannabis from Schedule 1 on a federal basis and moving it to a lower schedule would be more problematic than just descheduling it, completely. Like, I don't want to see rescheduling. I want to see descheduling. But if there's a second path, which there appears there may be at the state level, of saying, okay, well, we can actually just say you no longer have oversight. I mean, there may be a path like that as well, where you say, okay, it's a Schedule 3 drug, but we're also going to pass a law federally that says that the FDA doesn't have oversight on this. Now, I don't know if that can be done, but if it can't be, and states continue to do what Nevada did, then they might take all the bite out anyway and say, go ahead, make it a Schedule 3, but we're still going to treat it as it's descheduled in our state. So you guys can try to put on whatever restrictions you want, but ultimately we're going to disregard those. Curious to see how that works, and curious to see whether or not states like Nevada, if others follow suit, that this won't cause the federal government to really think about how they go through descheduling or rescheduling at the time. But if they know that no state's willing to have their pharmacy boards oversee the product, then what choice do they have but to say, okay, let's assign this to a different alphabet agency than the FDA. So I love this story because it gets a lot of other wheels sort of going in motion. If a handful of other states do the same thing that Nevada did and look to Nevada and say that's actually a really smart idea, now let's start thinking about how to address it in our own state. More importantly than that, or equally as important to that, is going back to what we discussed last week with interstate commerce. Now if you've got a state that says, hey, we don't have any pharmacy board oversight or control on this, and the next step is let's get a similar legal opinion, then it's not like the pharmacy board can jump in Nevada and say, oh, no, you can't do this because we've got oversight. It just takes that much more of an impediment away from any potential on interstate commerce once we get to that point, especially because it's a contiguous state with California. So I thought this was an important announcement.
It's huge, but once again, the lawyer in me, and I'm sure in you, forces me to really drill down to what was happening in the courtroom, and other than the bigger policy that comes out of it, what was the judge really doing? And in this case, the judge specifically said that the pharmacy board in Nevada had acted outside of its authority when it failed to remove cannabis from the list of Schedule 1 substances. Now, again, this is Nevada's Controlled Substance Act and not the United States, but attorneys in the United States for years have been trying to get a judge to say just that, basically to recognize that cannabis has no business being on a Schedule 1. And here was a Nevada state judge who had no trouble spelling it out and making it the central part of his opinion. He went on to say, if the pharmacy board designates a substance as a controlled substance, but the designation falls outside the authority designated by the legislature, the designation is invalid. Now that shows a little bit more interplay between the state legislature and the pharmacy board. But even still, the bottom line is you can't call something a Schedule 1 if it's not really a Schedule 1. And, thank God that the state of Nevada is right on top of that.
Agreed, and hats off to the state of Nevada for reacting that way and moving us away from Schedule 1 status. It's still amazing to me that a state that was so anti-cannabis for so many years now is so pro-cannabis. And it's rare you see such a huge 180. But naturally, we've always thought Nevada would have been a place where cannabis would have been accepted based on its acceptance of other vice. But for years, as we've discussed previously, it was not. Now we can firmly say that Nevada has embraced the cannabis industry.
That and can't remember the name of it. Maybe you do, but the new hotel that's opening up soon and right near the Strip, that's going to be the first 420 friendly hotel. When you can go to Las Vegas, you can buy your marijuana and you can actually just sit in your hotel room and get high. I think it's just a matter of time. Hopefully, that's just getting us over the stumbling blocks out there, because Nevada has, you're right, Rob, been a place that has traditionally been a little bit tricky if you're a person who enjoys marijuana consumption. Back into this show, and even though we've got these great stories today, like I say, this music is just fantastic, and we're going to jump back into another song from Feb 13th, 1970 at the Filmore East. This is a song that we're going to play. It's called Little Sadie. It's got a bunch of aliases. Unlike Wake Up Little Susie, this one was only played 7 times by the Grateful Dead over a much longer period of time, 66 to 1980. But let's go and listen to it, and we'll talk more about it on the back end.
I standing on the corner reading a bill. Along come the sheriff from Thomasville. Says, young man, is your name Brown? Remember the night you blowed Sadie down? Oh yes sir, my name is Lee. I murdered little Sadie in the first degree and the second degree. Got into papers, would you read them to me?
It's such a unique song. First recorded by Clarence Ashley back in 1929. The most common version in country and rock is attributed to T.J. Red Arnall's 1947 Western swing recording with W.A. Nichols's Western Aces. It's this version, the 47 version that we just heard. It's been covered in addition to the Dead. Garcia and Grisman covered it on their Pizza Tapes album, which, by the way, if you've never heard the Pizza Tapes, get it. It's just a great opportunity to hear those two guys go together with one another, and it's really exceptional, and they do play a great version of this song. But it was been covered by Johnny Cash, Crooked Still, Doc Watson, George Thorogood, a good friend of ours. Saw him open for the Rolling Stones way back in the day with Mike and Dan and H. And, of course, Bob Dylan has even recorded a version of this, although they say his was more closer akin to the original Ashley version back in '29. When you read about the song, the first thing that I learned is that they considered a 20th century folk ballad written in what's called a Dorian mode. Now, I have no idea what that means. I looked it up online, and I still have no idea what it means. But there was an interesting list of other hit songs that were written in the Dorian mode, and they include Evil Ways, Lowdown, Foxy Lady, Owner of a Lonely Heart, get those Yes folks in there, Moondance, Billie Jean, and Scarborough Fair. So apparently, whatever the mode is, a lot of people in rock and roll liked it and tried to incorporate it in their own music. And in this instance, it's just a great song. And, it's like Jerry telling us a story with his guitar, and that's the way all good songs like that are supposed to be. So whether you call it Little Sadie, Bad Lee Brown, Cocaine Blues, Transfusion Blues, East St. Louis Blues, Late One Night, or Penitentiary Blues, it's a great tune, and it was wonderful to hear the Dead cover it, and just adding to the joy of those who made it to the Fillmore East on February 13th, 1970. Now, There is a show the next night, February 14th, 1970, so a little Valentine's special. It's hosted by a local radio host named Zachary Lee, who comes out and has all sorts of fun introductions and other comments along the way. Some really, really great tunes in that show as well. Um, but we just went with the 13th because at the end of the day, it's got a great combination of tunes, um, new, old, classic, and it ends, and we'll get to this later on tonight, with what many people call the greatest love light ever. So we'll find out if you guys agree with that. But either way, this is just a fantastic show and something that uh, so much fun that let's just dive right back into one more clip here, Dan. I think, and then we can pull away and get into some other stuff in a minute. Um, but this is a very early version of Black Peter, which of course made its debut on Working Man's, which came out shortly after this show. But listen to this special acoustic version of Jerry.
Everything leads up to this day, and it's just like any other day that's ever been. Sun going up and down, the sun is going down. Shine through my window, and my friends they come around. Come around. Come around. Oh.
So that made it into the lineup today, thanks to the suggestion of Rob Hunt, who unfortunately had to run out during that last musical break, tend to some burning business matters or whatever these marijuana guys in California have to tend to. And we will carry on without him, but shout out to Rob because he asked for the Black Peter. And, he's absolutely right. I had Monkey and the Engineer slotted in that spot. I love Monkey and the Engineer. It's a fun tune. It's always great to hear the boys play it, especially when they're doing it acoustic. But, when they're playing an acoustic set, and these 1970 shows did have acoustic sets, so it was actually a three-set show. Um, to hear Black Peter, because on the album it's electric, and everywhere else you hear it, it's electric, and here it's just so beautiful. I don't know if it's the Jerry's guitar, if it's his voice. You can really hear the range in his vocals, and it tells a very, very pretty story. And the farther I go along in life, the more I realize how much I underappreciated Black Peter when we were actually going around and hearing all the shows. And we've told this story before. Everybody's waiting for Morning Dew, and if you're not going to get Morning Dew, everybody's looking for Wharf Rat or Stella. And Black Peter always kind of felt like the after run of Jerry jams, Jerry ballads after the drums in space in the second set. Um, but when you break them all down, I think Black Peter is right up there with all of them, and it just lends itself to being played in this beautiful acoustic manner, and really a lot of fun to listen to. And again, shout out to Rob because he's the one that suggested I go back and drop that in and not miss out on an opportunity to spin that as part of today's show. So thank you for that, Rob. Bouncing back over into the news for a little bit, and we got a story here that's kind of the downside of where we're at in the industry. We've been trying to pump it up as much as we can. We're highlighting what's going on in Missouri and all the luck not luck, but strong showing that they've had down there. Nevada and the strong direction that it's moving in terms of how it regulates. But the other side of this story that we've touched on is, what's happening to some of these businesses. They got a jump start on everybody, businesses that have grown and grown even larger. And one of the companies that we've talked about from time to time that's had more than its share of problems in recent years is MedMen. MedMen first came on the scene. It was really one of the very first of the big operations to take off, led by Adam Bierman back in 2013 and 2014. He was a strong presence at all of the conferences. Talked a really good game. By 2018. They were doing so well that he was making huge contributions to the various marijuana policy project and other programs like that support legalization and marijuana use in this country. And although he could be a divisive figure sometime, and he'd be the first to tell you that, uh, the strides that he made were, nothing short of huge. His company made waves when, in about 2018 or 2019, they signed a lease for a dispensary on Fifth Avenue in New York City. Significant because not only was it the most expensive marijuana real estate in the country, but at the time, New York had not yet passed its adult use, and their medical program was a non-flower medical program. So you go into this beautiful dispensary on Fifth Avenue in the heart of Midtown, and you can shop for CBD and CBD vapes. And while I think it probably drew a certain number of visitors in just because of how unique it is and its location and everything. I don't know that it was really situated uh, well in terms of how much it was costing them to be there, given the sales that they could recognize. And while I appreciate Adam's train of thought that, look, it's all about publicity, and if you're on Fifth Avenue in New York, that's about the best publicity in terms of location you can get. But he just fell victim to the times as they were, both in cannabis and hemp and everything else. There's been other problems at MedMen that we've talked about in the past: internal disputes, lawsuits, fights over money. But for right now, I think it's more important, to focus on the good that they did for the industry, and the strides that they help it make up. And Adam's problem was probably just being a few years too early for his time. There's a number of big MSOs and other groups out there that run marijuana entities, if you will, today, dynasties. And some of them I think make Adam seem kind of pretty tame by comparison. And some of them make Adam seem very much the norm in terms of a guy who he himself was never really that big into marijuana, but he saw the opportunities there and dived in and went with it. But now it looks like they've kind of reached the end of the line, and things do not look well for MedMen, and we'll just have to see. The headlines talk about them facing a major reckoning, which is oftentimes just cover up for, boy, the shit's going to really hit the fan here. So let's just see if it does and to what degree. But either way, good luck to MedMen, and hopefully they can find a way to be able to stay part of this industry. And if not, we'll just have to remember them for the impressions that they made while they were here. That is sorry to see, and uh, it's just sorry because anytime a business fails in the cannabis industry, it feels bad. This is an industry we've always talked about, that where everybody in the industry has to support one another. The industry rises and falls based on the overall performance of all of its members, not just a couple of golden ones at the front of the line that have the best locations or have come up with the best product or the best advertising or whatever it is that makes them number one. And that's great. They can be number one, but we have to remember that the folks that are at the back of the line, who the last ones to get approved, who are just coming on board, we need them to succeed too. Not only because it gives a more robust and competitive cannabis market, but because we're still in a place in time where the majority of society, not the majority of society, the majority of society of adults think that marijuana should be legal. But even within that group and a number of other people who still, kind of scoff at the idea of marijuana a little bit and make light of legal marijuana and really wonder if this is what we need. And every time a dispensary fails, I think they see that as a victory for them. That, the society is not so cannabis crazed as everybody likes to say, that, we needed all of these dispensaries or all of these cultivation centers. Um, and it's unfortunate if people go in that direction with it, but we know that this exists out there. And the way to effectively fight back against that perception is by showing that cannabis companies do survive and they thrive. And they don't all have to make millions of dollars, but they have to be, important parts of their neighborhood, and such that, they're not looked at as an outsider, but looked at and welcomed as a significant part and a contributing member of the financial health and well-being of any municipality or town that chooses to allow marijuana to be sold there. And so when a company this big as MedMen goes, and we talked about other companies last week, uh, Canagro and a few others that are just having all sorts of problems, we have to sit back and look at that and really wonder what that means for the industry as a whole, and hope that in addition to being able to bounce back from whatever financial repercussions they are, that it doesn't push back on the positive spin that everyone's trying to establish for the industry, because I think that more than anything can really hold back our progress and our ability to eventually allow American adults to get high without worrying about what other people say or think about it. So we will see where that goes, and certainly hope for the best. Turning my attention back to my one of my favorite concerts here. As we get into this next phase of the concert, it really becomes great because the boys stretch out and really start to get into a little bit more Primal Dead, which is what we were hoping for anytime we hear them. And we've had the ability to hear some of the earlier tunes. So we're going to dive into this one really fast and then talk about it on the way out. So this is part of That's It for the Other One. So, first of all, we are rejoined again by Rob Hunt, who, like every good business exec, knew how to get his business over and done and get back to the important things. So, welcome back, Rob. But when you get a full That's It for the Other One on this show, it's a 30-minute stretch. And I was even explaining it a little bit to Dan today when we were trying to get the clips down and everything. But you start off with the framework of That's It for the Other One, and then within that you have the cryptical envelopment, and you have especially at this time, you have the Bill Kreutzmann drum solo. You eventually get back into the other one. Then you hop back into the reprise at the end. I mean, for 30 minutes, it's like almost a little mini concert right within all of that. And I like this part because this was an important part in the 1970s, the early 1970s. They would drop a drum solo in there for a minute, and then you'd get that big, loud, like we just heard, drum introduction to the other one, and takes you to great places.
It does, and obviously the drum solo I think eventually was replaced by the fill bomb, but both were good ways to drop into the other one. And I gotta say, as much as I like the whole suite, I think sometimes I'm disappointed when the Dead drop portions of songs, like the way they sort of stop playing the early part of Weather Report. But with the other one, I'm almost happy that they eventually just moved to only playing the other one and got rid of the cryptical envelopment part, just because I thought it was a bit morose. I was never a huge cryptical fan, though I know a lot of other people are.
Yeah, no, look, I love Cryptical. We just came along a little too late for it. We got to hear it a few times when they resurrected it for a while there, and it was fun. But look, there's no doubt that if you're at a great jamming concert and they're in the middle of a really hot drums and into space, and you can just hear them leading up, setting the foundation for Phil to come flying in with those bass bombs and diving right into the song. And certainly this is the part of the song that is much more energetic and uplifting. And so it's really great to hear, and the way they just pull it all together like that.
Yeah, no doubt. And that's the thing I love about these shows is that it goes all the way from the acoustics to the sort of the deepest spacey far out on the electric and everything in between. And that's why 213 and 21470 are such fun shows to listen to, and it should be part of everyone's collection.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with that more. Just go by Dick's Picks 4, and it's a good place to start. So while you were outside, we managed to address the issue of MedMen leaving the scene. Don't know if you had any thoughts you wanted to throw into that one or not, but my point was that you can love Adam Behrman or you can hate him, but I'm just not a fan of seeing companies fail in the industry because I think that works against the positive spin that we're trying to put on this industry as being a positive and real up-and-coming industry for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, let's start with the fact that I don't hate anyone, and I don't think there's any place for it. Ain't no time to hate. But what I will say is that while I agree with the sentiment that you just said, I disagree with the approach on it because it's guys like Bierman that give black eyes to the industry. If Bierman hadn't been such a shameless impresario and gone out there and shilled for for how terrific he was and how he was building the greatest thing in the world, and had other people buy into these lofty valuations. I mean, he was kind of the original pumper into the industry of setting unrealistic expectations. That if he'd come in and said, "Hey, we're going to try to grow this business," like he forced every other company behind him to try to follow suit. People say, "Well, I invested in this company because they said they're going to 20x my money in the first 3 years, and if you can't do that, then I'm going with MedMen." Well, never stopping to think whether or not Bierman was full of shit the entire time, which he was. So when I see a company go out of business, there's times I'm almost happy to see them go from the industry, because ultimately I think they set the stage the wrong way. I'd rather companies that are realistic about how they're going to manage their growth be rewarded, instead of left by the wayside because investors think that that they can do better elsewhere, because you've got guys like Bierman trying to convince them that they're the second coming of Christ. It doesn't make sense to me.
Well, it's interesting, and it raises a really interesting point, because I was thinking about this before. And what I come away with is I think that Adam Bierman was a product of the forces that were coming together at that time, which was an emerging cannabis market. But back in 2012 and 2013, it was a much different time than where it was today. And there were not a lot of people, big companies or otherwise, really rushing in to get into this space. And for better or for worse, Adam kind of stepped into that void and really became one of the first ones to go in that direction. And I raise this because one of the other stories we have today is that Australia just legalized psilocybin and MDMA prescriptions. And the U.S., we know, we've talked about this in the past, that patients are seeking similar authorization. And if, in fact, they pass that authorization in the United States, who are going to be the Adam Biermans of the psilocybin industry? Who are going to be the people that are going to be willing to step in, whether they're good guys or jerks, to fill that initial void and, try to get the industry jump-started and moving forward?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, if you're saying who are the next charlatans that we can we can count on to create bombast and ridicule their competition, that's like asking who the next pharma bro is. Who the next Martin Shkreli is. I think hopefully no one would be my answer. Already the psychedelic space is chock full of people that are trying to exact as much investment capital as they can without having a real path forward, without having any idea of how they're going to derive a profit. So, and again, it's not to say a lot of people haven't been successful making those early investments, but I think, in many ways, in the United States, the 1.0 psychedelic investment's already come and gone. I know a lot of guys that exited 2-3 years ago, they're like, I wouldn't put another dollar into it right now. We were putting all of our money in sort of the pre-RTO raises, round 1, round 2, even maybe round 3 privately before they went public. But if you look at the public performance of the psychedelics market, it's no better than the performance right now of the cannabis market. So, as you know, as big a fan as I am of psychedelics, I'm still not convinced that psychedelics have the same path ahead of them that cannabis does. I think there's too many unknowns that go along with that market. So, fantastic that Australia is making that move. I hope every country makes a move towards saying people should be able to experiment with substances as they so choose. But do I want some person out there on a soapbox talking about how they're the greatest purveyor of ayahuasca? I certainly don't.
Okay, well, I can appreciate that that sentiment and that perspective as well. I guess the answer to my question is there's always somebody willing to sell something if people are willing to pay for it. But if we could try and find a way,
or said differently, there's a sucker born every day.
Well, that's true. If we're going to put the onus back on the consumer, I agree with that too. But I guess the point is that even in psychedelics, it's not just enough to have somebody pop up and say, "Hey, I'm going to be the guy selling psychedelics here or there." The thing that I look at MedMen is that while I understand your sentiments, I think that they sent a message to everybody that, look, you can be big, you can advertise. In some respects, I kind of felt, like Adam was somebody who liked to try and, tweak society's nose all the time anyway. Who else goes and drops a dispensary on Fifth Avenue in the middle of Midtown Manhattan, knowing that all you can sell is CBD? But nevertheless, there's a presence of it on, of a cannabis store on Fifth Avenue. And people walk by and they say, "Oh, look, they're selling cannabis on Fifth Avenue now." And even if they don't know MedMen, and even if they don't know who's behind it, they see a relatively modern type of sales facility as opposed to the thought of running into a bodega in the back and trying to get your weed from a guy behind a counter who doesn't look at you in the eye kind of thing. And I guess in other words, he took it more mainstream in that regard in terms of the way it was presented and the way it was showcased.
Sure, if we're going to try to find the silver lining that exists, in this discussion, then yes, the mainstreaming of cannabis, we can certainly, thank Bierman for getting involved and trying to showcase it. But I looked at that going, okay, this is just another example of him trying to fleece investors, because anyone that knew the New York market at the time knew it was an absolute impossibility to turn a profit with what the regulations were and with the way that you could actually sell. I mean, at the time you couldn't even sell flour, right? So 50% of the market is gone day one, and you're paying $100,000 a month in rent for this location. I mean, the entire thing, if looked at objectively, was the height of foolishness. And I look at other marquee locations that people overpay for, and they don't make a great deal of sense to me. The operators I've always appreciated in the cannabis space are the ones who go, yeah, we can take this mainstream, but we don't need to be like an Hermes store where we're gonna put out T-shirts that say like Aspen, LA, Tokyo. That's not necessary to sell weed. This isn't this isn't LVMH. This isn't a luxury brands company. This is weed. So, just make a great product, find a good location, people will come, and you don't have to charge exorbitant prices to get them to come in, because you've got this lifestyle that you're trying to create around it of like, you too can be successful if you, shop at MedMen on Fifth Avenue. And I thought that, yes, he may have mainstreamed it, but he also probably has, again, set unrealistic expectations that I think ultimately did significantly more damage to the industry than any positive he might have brought. But I mean, look, I can bash Adam Bierman all day. So if you want to keep going down this road, we should probably talk about something else. But it's one of my favorite topics of conversation is, economics class could be taught, or a law class could be taught about all the things that guy did wrong and what damage he did to the industry in the process, and how many investors he hurt and how much money was just absolutely destroyed, like in terms of value, as a result of him feeding nonsense to the investors. And at this point, look, I hope he's listening. I hope he thinks that there's some sort of recourse for me saying this stuff. But the best defense to slander is truth.
Okay. Well said, and I think you're right. It's probably time to move on, and we've hashed that discussion out about as much as we can. I want to turn back to the comment you made though about legalizing psilocybin, because interestingly enough, I too have a little bit of concern in that area. And my concern stems from the fact that I have seen people who have had a few too many edibles and the reactions that they have as a result. And I can only imagine the type of reactions that people will have if they inadvertently or vertently eat a little too much psilocybin. With marijuana, there's a little bit of room to work with. If you eat too much psilocybin and you get the trip machine in your body rocking forward, that can be a lot more difficult for people to cope with, and could take substantially longer for you to come back down and normalize yourself.
Yeah, I mean, look, from the perspective of someone that in the past has definitely eaten far too much psilocybin, I can tell you that it can go from fun to scary relatively quickly. And again, much like edibles, people don't take the advice of start slow or start low and go slow. Oftentimes they go, oh, I'm not feeling anything, maybe I'll take a little more. Oh, I'm not feeling anything, maybe I'll take a little more. And there is an onset that exists with psilocybin, like there is with cannabis edibles consumption before it is absorbed into your bloodstream. And I can tell you, like I've gotten high enough where I'm relatively uncomfortable as to what my future looks like for the next 4 or 5 hours. And that's not something that I would recommend, for a lot of people. I've also, more importantly, witnessed a lot of people that are very experienced with psychedelics going past the point of okay, as I'm sure you have as well. And whether it's a bad trip or whether it's just simply too much, I've had to talk quite a few friends off the ledge over the years. Fortunately, not too recently. But and then there is the proverbial ledge and the actual ledge, which is if your faculties are that impaired, can you get yourself into harmful situations inadvertently? And then there's is there liability attached to that if someone's actually selling you a product that they know causes that kind of reaction? look, in a controlled environment. Going back to sort of the Timothy Leary school of psychedelics, of controlled environment, the shamans, in Peru. That's one thing, but realistically, that's not how people trip. People trip by going out there and having fun. It's not all about clinical studies and controlled environment settings. It's as I've always said, I subscribe to the Ken Kesey school of psychedelics, which is let's get out there and go nuts and have fun. And if that's the way you're doing it, there are going to be casualties, and I don't see the U.S. government supporting that. I just don't.
Yeah, I think that it is much more problematic. Although, this people really they still do, kind of make snide remarks and secondhand comments about medical marijuana. Yeah, sure, medical marijuana, and medical marijuana has worked wonders for me, so I don't downplay it at all. But I think a lot of people tend to do that. I think that if psilocybin and MDMA have any future, they have a future strictly as a medical application, strictly with a doctor's prescription, and strictly, in controlled amounts. I guess you can't always control the location of where you're at, but with detailed instructions on where, when, and how, and what to expect, and what to do if you find yourself in a position where you think you've taken too much. I don't know whether the medical community will ultimately want that much responsibility for it, although there's stories all over the place about how therapists and other counselors and stuff like that have seen, wonderful results when used the right way with certain types of patients. But I'm guessing we're probably still a long way away from having any kind of reliable medical knowledge on who and what and how much at any one time. And I think that's always going to be the problem with these things. When back in school, you could eat a little baggie of mushrooms one time and, be trying to get yourself down from the clouds and eat the same amount the next time and be sitting there wondering what the hell happened. Why isn't anything going on for me this time, So it's just one day you're up, one day you're down. Did I eat a big meal? Am I tired? What else is going on with me? And it's a lot of factors to take into account.
Yeah, but that's you're talking about, where you're eating the carrier, though, right? If ultimately you're talking about taking, doses of psilocybin, then that's much more controlled, like taking doses of THC. But again, to play the today's contrarian or counterpoint role of being a real cynic with this, I would also look at it from the perspective of the argument you just made is the same argument that Purdue Pharmaceuticals made with OxyContin, which is taken the right way. They can do a lot of good. It can help a lot of people. And the answer is it can. OxyContin's a terrific product if taken, correctly and taken in a clinical setting and taken exactly as prescribed. But realistically, that's not what happens. People like to get high, and you put something out there that can be abused, it's going to get abused. There's no two ways about it. Even if it's something that is terrific for you medically, there isn't a product that gets you high on the market that isn't abused, even if it's prescribed as a pharmaceutical, whether it's morphine, whether it's oxy, whether it's Vicodin, you name the product, they all have a level of abuse. I mean, shit, whipped cream is abused to the point that you now have to get it from behind the counter. I had to get someone at Walgreens yesterday to go and unlock a case to get me Flonase, right? So whatever it is, it's going to be abused. So do I want something that we all know can have detrimental effects? Much more so than a lot of other substances. Cannabis, as I said, is relatively innocuous. It's hard to get yourself in trouble with it. With edibles you can, but there's no level of toxicity that'll kill you. With psychedelics, I've seen the other side, man. I've been there, and I know how I know how dark they can be, and how unpredictable they can be. Even if you were to take the same dose 3 times in a row, your body could have a completely and totally different reaction depending on 1,000 different stimuli that exist in your life at that moment.
True. It'll be fascinating for me to see as we go down the road, whether there's a way that science and medicine and big pharma, whoever tackles it, can try and figure out a way to come up with consistent doses of that kind of stuff. But I guess unless you can control for the other factors that are going on in your body at the time, they may not ever be able to do that.
Yeah. Even if they could, I mean, I understand the idea of the whole microdose idea of let's make sure the dose is small enough that we're trying to reach parts of your brain or parts of sort of your inner psyche that you otherwise wouldn't hit by even just giving you a small dose, and hopefully from a psychiatric perspective that can unlock all sorts of things. I am all for that, 100% behind it, but at the same time I know that 20 micrograms turns into 50 micrograms, turns into 100 mics, turns into a pinky print of crystal. It's, like the more you experiment, the more your desire is to see, okay, can you go a step deeper? It's kind of like the movie Flatliners. At a certain point, like how far are you willing to go to see what's out there? And with psychedelics, because the interest level is so high, the desire to go deeper is relatively great, or at least it was for me, and I think it is for a lot of people that have like an adventurous spirit. But you also have to temper that with sort of knowing the deeper you get, it's like diving. Like, you want to go deeper in the water, and once you start experiencing nitrogen narcosis, there's a certain desire to get narked a little bit more, because it's such a euphoric feeling. But you have to temper that with knowing that if you go too deep, you're not getting back to the surface. And it's a very, very similar thing for me.
Yeah, no, look, I can definitely see that and understand that. And, any of us who have ventured down that road have had, experienced that one way or another if we've been adventurous in any way, shape, or form. And, it's happened at Dead shows where, I've spent the whole time doing everything but actually watching the show. So yeah,
Avoiding mirrors.
well, that too, yeah, all sorts of stuff that goes along with it. But this conversation about narcotics and medicine leads me to another story that I found today, and this is like a word to the wise, but in kind of a reverse way, right? There's stories coming out now that if you're a candidate for surgery or of any type, or otherwise have to be put under anesthesia for either for a dental procedure or colonoscopy, I suppose, or anything else where they knock you out, that they're telling you need to disclose, even if not asked, to the anesthesiologist that you are a marijuana smoker and the level of marijuana that you smoke, not because they're concerned about a negative interaction that might result, like if you eat a lot of food before you go in and get put under, but because your resistance might be so high that the anesthesiologist might determine that you need a larger dose of anesthesia to properly put you under and keep you under. And quite frankly, that spin of something like that was not something that I ever thought of before. My father's a surgeon, so I always kind of grew up with this understanding: if you're going in for surgery, you don't do anything beforehand, because it's going to be bad for you. But this kind of turns it on its head a little bit, except I guess it's bad for you if they don't give you enough because they don't know that you're a pot smoker. So, I'd like to see more information about this. And my son's father-in-law is an anesthesiologist down in Georgia, so maybe he and I can sit down and talk about this a little bit and try and get more to the point on it. But I would say it certainly makes sense to me, that if you are a person who uses cannabis on any kind of a regular basis and you're going to have surgery, I would recommend letting your anesthesiologist know about it to make sure you stay comfortable during that surgery.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that in theory also, but I also know that people are still so paranoid to be put on any sort of list or of anything in their file. And I think the article was actually really good to point out that the person that wrote it, being an anesthesiologist, said, look, we don't care. We're not passing judgment here. But that's fine, but are you putting something in my file? And as the next person that sees that, and are you going to have a point at some point where you don't get insured because they pull your medical records and here it is that you're a habitual cannabis user? So until we remove the stigma and have it so people can't deny you coverage or deny you benefits or deny you other things based on your cannabis use, I don't think it's all that realistic to expect that everyone's going to volunteer that information, even if it's probably in their best interest to do so.
Well, I think you're right, and you touch on another big point, which is something that we all rail about all the time, which is normalization. Nobody should be embarrassed or afraid to go in and tell their doctor, and they should. The concern you describe is spot on. Even if the doctor says, "I don't care," but now you've told them something, they've got to put it into their file to maintain a complete file on you. And you're right. If some insurance company comes back and reviews it, another doctor reviews it, a new potential employer reviews it, you have no idea. And so what it does, I guess, is it creates this kind of conflict between doing what's really best for yourself and trying to maintain a somewhat private public profile in terms of how much information of yours is available out there. And you're right. I think that a lot of people will, as a result, not say anything. But I just don't want to see a case where somebody in the middle of gallbladder surgery all of a sudden wakes up because they were a heavy smoker. They didn't tell their anesthesiologist. That ain't going to be fun. So it's going to be interesting to see how doctors work to kind of bridge that gap between necessary knowledge and reluctance to share it.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think in certain parts of everyone's life you go through that, what you say or don't say. And I can tell you when doctors ask, do you drink? I think 95% of Americans lie about how much they drink because they don't want to say that they're more than a casual drinker. Everyone's like, oh yeah, I've one a day. I don't know anyone that ever tells their doctor anything more than that. And I can tell you that on another side, I got hit by one time by an out of control skier when I was working at Snowbird. Clearly concussed. I mean, the guy came over a berm and hit me dead on with his skis against my head. Saw stars, couldn't get up for a minute or two. And I couldn't do a thing about it because had I gone into to get checked out, I would have had to, because I was an employee, I would have had to do a urinalysis. And with a urinalysis, it would have absolutely come up that I used cannabis, and I would have been fired on the spot, despite the fact that I was the victim in this case. So basically, I had to deny myself medical coverage because of a drug testing policy that Snowbird had at the time, which hopefully they don't have anymore. And I know for sure that I'm not the only person that dealt with that. Like anytime there's any sort of issue, you had to basically self-police. I mean, one of my co-employees, like, one was like, you should get checked out. And the other one's like, yo, man, if you do, like, you're going to have to pee. And I was like, ah. So, again, from normalization, we have to humanize this and treat people fairly first, and then think about, whether or not there's some sort of harm. But I do blame the insurance companies. I blame the out of control HR departments for a long time of being convinced that they had to take these policies, especially on a substance where you couldn't tell whether or not the person was impaired at the time of an accident. So we've come a long way since then, but we still have a long way to go until it's fully normalized.
Absolutely. And on that note, let's dive back into our concert for a minute because we got the follow-up portion of the That's It for the Other One jam. And this brings us in right as they're making the final transition. So, Dan, if you could spin that for us, and we'll go back to 1970 and jam out.
Escaping through the fields, I came across an empty space. It trembled and exploded. There's a bus stop in its place. The bus come by, I got on, that's when it all began. There was Calm O'Neill at the wheel, the bus to never ever land. Coming around, coming around, coming around.
Look at that, man. They're tearing through the other one, and literally on a dime, they just stop and they slot right over back into the reprise. The tempo comes down. Jerry's picking his guitar. We hear him singing at the end. What a great 30 minutes of music.
It is impressive, very, very impressive that they're able to do it that way. And the masters of the transition jam and the masters of being able to thematically know exactly where the other members are to switch like that, which sometimes is easy to do in like Pink Floyd style music where everything is orchestrated. Very, very difficult to do when you're a jazz ensemble or when you're a jam band.
Just really quickly, you mentioned Pink Floyd. They were in the news the other day because they had a little blow up between Waters and Gilmour. And when I saw the headline, I'm like, haven't these guys...
It was Gilmour's wife that got into it with him.
Well, that too. But haven't these guys been... This is our final argument where we hate each other. Every 5 years they have a new, now this one, they're obviously getting a little more personal with Roger Waters, and I try to steer away from that as much as I can because even though I don't approve of what Roger Waters does and his messages, I love Pink Floyd's music, so that's always kind of created a little bit of a conflict for me, but it just was fascinating to me to read that these guys, it's almost on a certain level as though, I don't know how many kids today or people today that are listening to music really even associate with Pink Floyd, certainly on the same level that we did when they were such an integral part of the music scene and everything that we were getting into at the time. But I guess, if you go by the school that says any publicity is good publicity, people are talking about him again this week.
Yeah, I guess. And, I think they're still relevant. They got a huge amount of publicity putting out their 50th anniversary at Dark Side with the whole... Prism and the MAGA Republicans thinking they're like this woke band. And it's like, no, it's the same theme they had 50 years ago. So it's always very funny to me what people glom onto to be angry about these days. For me, it just stays with Adam Bierman.
Listen, well, here's some quick music news. You saw that we talked. I think that Phil was going to do two shows at the Salt Shed here, March 11th and 12th, and now Warren Haynes has been announced to play at those two shows, which I'm very, very excited about because Phil's going to be in New York the next week at the Cap Theater for his birthday shows, and I have not seen that Warren's going to be following him to New York. This might be it.
Yeah, that's possible. But anytime you get a chance to see Warren play with anyone, I'm all for it, and certainly love seeing him with Phil too. So it should be a lot of fun. Definitely makes you at this point. I'm hitting the point where I think any Phil show you can see, you should go see because I can't imagine there's too many more left in him. I think we're probably down to the last handful. Based on everything I've been seeing. So, and he's certainly picking some great musicians to play with these days. And I don't know if you listened to any of those collabs with Rick recently, but those were pretty darn good too from Denver. So if you haven't seen those, they're out there on YouTube right now. There's a handful of videos, and they are smoking hot.
They are smoking hot, and he deserves a lot of credit for it. But what I think is so amazing is not that he wants to keep playing, but that all of these younger performers are standing in line to play with him. And I mean, obviously you could say, well, the guy's a legend, but still, if you got to get on stage with somebody, you want to know that that person's going to be able to hold up their end of the bargain. And, based on, when you can get Warren Haynes to just announce like that, I'm in, I just take that as a positive sign that at least for now, thank God, Phil's going strong, and I can't wait to see him. But you're right, you see him and you walk out and you're like, will there be a next time?
Yep. Well, I certainly hope there is. I definitely hope there is.
As do I. Now, earlier this week, so a week ago, if you're a week and more, when you're finally listening to this, we had the Grammy Awards, and there's two things that came out of the Grammys that I just thought were too important that couldn't be passed. And the first one, given that this is a Deadhead Cannabis show, is that the Grateful Dead won a Grammy, only their second ever. In 2017, the Grateful Dead won a Lifetime Achievement Award. That came many years after Garcia had died, so it's kind of hard to call it a real Grammy for the Grateful Dead, although, Lifetime Achievement is certainly not a bad thing. But this year, 2023, in a category that I did not even know existed, the Grateful Dead won for the Best Box Set or Limited Edition for their In and Out of the Garden, Madison Square Garden, 81, 82, and 3 box set, which we have discussed on this show. And God love them. How after all these years, look at how relevant they still are just by putting out, they're not playing, they're not doing anything. And, they come up with something like that. So good to the boys, David Lemieux and the whole artistic staff that helped create this box set. Good for them. Any publicity is good publicity, and I'm happy to see the Dead still being recognized. Rob, I got to tell you, it sure makes me feel like our show is relevant when that happens.
Yeah, in 27 years, maybe people will still be listening to us. It's we can only hope. Maybe we're just hitting our creative peak right now, but no one's going to recognize our genius until our children are older.
Well, that's okay. Then our children will get to have a little knock us out of all the good stuff that we've done. So as long as somebody gets it, that's good. But here's the other one, and this one blew me away for a bunch of reasons. Bonnie Raitt wins Song of the Year for her song Just Like That. This was the first time Bonnie Raitt ever won a Grammy for songwriting. She's been around forever. I could not believe that.
So what I will say is she has won for Album of the Year. She won for, I think, in 1990 for, I want to say it was Nick of Time was her album at the time. But what I found surprising is what a backlash there was against Bonnie Raitt of people online going, who is this woman? I've never heard of her. Like, how did Beyonce get passed over? Like, for some random obscure blues singer. Well, this random obscure blues singer's been around for 50 years, and she's already won Album of the Year before. So, okay, great. Taylor Swift wrote an amazing epic that a lot of people are upset didn't win, for songwriting. And that song was absolutely relevant last year. And perhaps in terms of popular culture, what Taylor did is more relevant. But if you read, the story behind the reason Bonnie Raitt wrote this song, it's a lovely story, and I think that the people that make the judgment on who wins these things looked at it for the songwriting quality that was there, and said, okay, despite popular support, Bonnie should get the credit for writing a great song, and she wrote a great song. So hats off to Bonnie, and maybe this makes it so more people in the next generation understand her creative genius, despite the fact that it's 30 years after they should have.
Look, here's what I'm going to say. If you've seen Bonnie Raitt in concert before, you could never say anything like what people are saying about Beyonce. Bonnie Raitt is maybe one of the finest guitar players alive today. Bonnie Raitt has a when she sang a little while later in that beautiful duet she sang, her voice was just with Sheryl Crow. Her voice was just unbelievable. I had never really considered just how beautiful Bonnie Raitt's voice is. She's such a veteran performer, and if anything, the people like Beyonce ought to be thanking Bonnie Raitt for setting the table for women performers in music, because I mean, what was really a man's industry, not just guitar playing, rock and roll, but country, all of that. And Bonnie Raitt she's the king.
Well, there's the irony, right? Is if you were to say to Taylor Swift, what do you think of Bonnie Raitt? I'm sure Taylor Swift would bow down and say she's amazing. And when I was young and I was a country musician, one of the people I learned from the most was probably. I mean, I'm just guessing this. So it's not the artists themselves; it's the fans. I mean, you always think that if you're a heavy metal band, that only means you listen to heavy metal. And if you're a blues band, you listen to the blues. Great musicians listen to everyone, and their canon of understanding of music. I'm quite certain Beyonce is very familiar with who Bonnie Raitt is, and probably has a great deal of respect and reverence for what she's done. So okay, great. The fans out there of the sort of the new pop culture don't appreciate Bonnie Raitt. That's okay. The musicians that you love do.
And you mentioned the backstory, right? It's a story about a woman who donated her son's heart after his death, and she met the organ recipient. And as Bonnie Raitt said, she lost it when the man let the mother hear her late son's heart beating inside of him. It's like you hear that. And of course, for Deadheads, let's not kid ourselves, that has a whole special relevance because we're sitting here talking about Phil. If you've seen a Phil show anytime in the last 25 years or so, you've heard the donor rap. And you've heard Phil tell you about how somebody else's unselfishness and willingness to make a gift of an organ saved his life. And we're all grateful for that because what Phil has been doing for us for the last 23 years has been nothing short of amazing. He's had a tremendous second career, once the Dead disbanded and he kind of, ventured out on his own and some would argue, and I might rightfully agree, that he's been the true keeper of the Dead flame throughout all of this time. And, where would we be today if he had died because there wasn't an organ donor available at a time when he needed a new organ?
Yeah, I agree. And you think about how long ago it's been now, and this isn't like, or he got a new lease of like 3 or 4 years. He's had 20 plus years on this liver, so it's a pretty amazing thing. And for all those out there, Phil does his rap, but I'll say it as well. Talk to the people you love and become an organ donor. It definitely can change someone's life.
No doubt about it. And hats off to Bonnie for putting it down in music and doing it so well. And just as a final thought on that, I love the shout out she gave to John Prine too, who's just another musical legend who I think doesn't always get the credit and the attention that he deserves. And he was just absolutely incredible. And so I thought that was a very touching moment by her to give him a shout out at that point in time. And I was very happy to hear that. Well, we've talked and talked. We've listened to a lot of great music. And I hope you guys have all been enjoying this because, these are the kind of shows I think that I can speak for me and maybe Rob too, that are just really so much fun. You have a great Grateful Dead show to talk about with so much good stuff behind it. A lot of good stuff happening in the world of cannabis, some of it good, some of it not so good, but it's just the reality of having legal cannabis. So yeah, Rob, I'm glad you made it back and were able to finish out the show with us. Always good to have your point of view on things. And we just have one more song here to go on the way out the door. One of our favorites, Love Light, song by Joe Scott and Don Roby, also known as Dedrick Malone, first recorded by the Bobby Blue Bland in 1961, and certainly a song that's been listed in the top 500 songs that shaped rock and roll, and all of this stuff. It was first played by the Dead as part of their Dark Star Saint Stephen the 11 Love Light Suite from Live Dead and that whole era. They brought it back and it got a lot of a lot of playing through the Europe 72 tour, and then it dropped off the stage for a while till Bobby brought it back for one performance in 81, a few more in 82, and then starting in 84, it got back into the rotation, and they played it all the way up to the end. And I always liked it when the Dead played it when I saw it. Bobby's not Pigpen, but I thought he did a decent job singing it, and Jerry was just still blazing away on the guitar. He doesn't care who's singing it. He loves playing that song. And, when they're playing it, they were just really, really clicking. But how wonderful is it to actually hear, Pigpen, we were talking about before, being a blues master. And, in this tune, he just kind of takes it and makes it his own. And I think that this final cut is great because what we've been saying all along, first of all, it's another 30-minute song, right? They played an hour and a half, almost 2 hours of music, and then they closed out with 90 minutes, a 30-minute Dark Star into a 30-minute That's In for the other one, into a 30-minute Love Light. And for me, I can't imagine a better Grateful Dead show than something like that, where you just get the full benefit of all that extended jamming and all that just tremendously great music. But listen to this when Pig's kind of doing his rapping, and then on a dime he just stops, jumps into that little box back nitty chant of his, and boom, the band's right with him once again, reading each other's minds, and putting them there. And Rob, I say, you gotta love Pig.
I love Pig, and going back to our theme earlier, Wake Up Little Susie. Pig's rap is certainly far dirtier than than Wake Up Little Susie ever was. So working undercover, and we ball all night.
If you haven't listened to an early Pig version of Love Light and listened to it all the way through, do it, but probably not safe for work. But otherwise, it is a lot of fun. So, Rob, as always, thank you, man. Great show. And Dan Humiston, thank you for doing a great job for us. We are excited to have everyone back next week. With February is a very rich month for the Dead. There's lots of good stuff going on in February, and we're going to try to cover as much of it as we can. But otherwise, enjoy Pigpen, enjoy Love Light, have a great week, and enjoy your cannabis responsibly.
Make me feel so good, just all night long. Yes, I will. One whole thing. Ain't gonna tell you all, but I'll just tell you a little bit. One of the reasons you make me feel so good. One of them reasons that you make me feel so nice. 'Cause she got back ready, great big and oversized, working on the cover with a ball. I got to be my rider. I got to be my soul. I got to be my rider. Oh, no.
Thanks for listening to today's show. To check out more great cannabis podcasts, go to PodConx.com. Here's a preview of one of our other shows.
I'm Joyce Gerber, the creator and host of the award-winning podcast, The Canna Mom Show. And we are on a mission to enhance the impact women have on this industry as business professionals, healthcare providers, policy advocates, caregivers, moms, by sharing and preserving their stories of love and kindness, wisdom, and hope. I am so grateful to have found my tribe of Canna podcasters right here on PodConx, and look forward to our work of crushing the stigma around cannabis and caregivers and building this new industry together.